Hello, Kansas and Western fans. Today we're going to do another video for my series about how I design these different scenes on my layout track plan wise. So today is going to be about the Garden City Holcomb Power Plant scene, which is what you see here in front of you. And this one was a little bit difficult because with this helix here, and if you didn't know, this is the top of a helix that goes all the way down to the bottom level, the staging level. The helix required some decisions that had to be made, not necessarily made, but were forced by the design of the helix. And that mainly revolves around the main line coming off of this top level and then having to enter the top level bench work. And as you can still see the bench work itself is kind of finagled into place in order to make this transition as smooth as possible. Because what you have is the main line following the helix grade, which is roughly 2%, probably a little bit more. And then it has to flatten out to get onto this top level bench work. And so not only do I have to feed the curve from the 5-foot helix that I have going around, I have to feed it back onto this straightaway. I have to do so making a gentle leveling off of this grade. And I don't know if you can really see how it is rising up here until about this point where it starts to level off. And I guess if you look down here, since I don't have this ballasted yet, you can see how the track doesn't even make contact with the cork because this is the transition point right here. And I've got a couple of ties put underneath. So when the train travels over, it presses down on the track to kind of help with that transition. Now, the transition is with the track firmly placed on those ties. So, and I'm not doing a very good job explaining this, but basically, once I ballast this in place, it'll be ballasted, making contact with those ties, and that'll be the final grade that crosses over, because that's the way it would be if the train was traveling with the weight of the locomotives. So I know that's the right way to, or that's the workable way to do it, and you won't see these ties underneath once it's ballasted. But the final grade, I guess, the transition will be in place once that track is ballasted. So you won't see that anymore. But anyway, with that coming off of the helix and going to the main level or the upper level, that created some limitations as to what I could do with the track plan here in the Garden City area. Originally, I was going to have a double track helix all the way to the top. But that would have required me to peel the main line back off to the background somehow. Sorry, excuse me. And that just wasn't going to work given how the helix is laid out. So what I ended up doing was having a double track main line with one of the tracks splitting off here at Holly. And if I pull this aside, you can see in there that second track. So it's that far track that ends up coming up to the top of the helix and exiting here. And that's worked out pretty well so far as operations have borne out. Now, the other issue with the upper level layout in general is how similar it was going to look to Holly, because it had pretty much the same amount of space to deal with. Down here in Holly, you have the main line coming off of the helix in the same direction as you do up here in Garden City. And I didn't want to copy the track plan because that would be boring. However, what I was able to do, since Holly terminates right here at this wall, which hides the helix, but Garden City is open, it allowed me a realistic place to put a siding here, which I could have done down there, but it would have been an extremely short siding. Because what we're trying to keep in mind is all of the operations for these two areas originate from yards on the layout and not from the helix, except for the Holcomb Power Plant, and we'll get to that in a second. So I didn't want to have basically a 5-foot long siding here because I thought that would have looked a little bit ridiculous. And there's only a single exit to the Holly yard in reality, so I could get away with not having a second turnout. So I was able to do that up here at Garden City. So you can see here, this turnout leads to the siding, which services or makes it able to serve the Holcomb Power Plant. Now, in reality, the Holcomb Power Plant is a single loop track that comes off the main line in a direction from the west. And I wanted to simulate that activity, but there was no way with this track coming from the west that I was going to be able to make a loop into the Holcomb Power Plant and have any kind of believable trackage in this area. So what I did instead was the train for the Holcomb Power Plant arrives off the helix onto the main line. It exits the main line onto the siding, and then I created the siding long enough for that train to pull off all the way down here to the Charleston elevator scene, and then essentially just back its train onto the Holcomb Power Plant spur, where the spur splits into two tracks, the unloading track and the storage track. And if you've seen my operations videos, I did one on this to prove that it worked, and it worked out very well. And then once the train is empty, it rebuilds itself onto the siding. There's enough room on the siding for the entire train to be pulled forward so that the power for the train, locomotives, can detach down there at the end of the siding and then run around itself on the main line. And I think we came all the way down to this final turnout here, this crossover, where it reattaches to its train sitting on the siding and then pulls back off onto the main line and back down to the helix. So I was able to recreate prototypical operations just in kind of a little bit longer process, but that's exactly what I wanted to work out, and that's the way it works. So that's how that works. Now, I also have a crossover here that comes from the east, which is where the Wichita Yard is. So that I can perform local operations, which serves Helena Chemical here and Midwest PMS here, and do so in a way where it doesn't impact the main line. Because one thing I wanted to do, thinking that my layout was big enough and my scenes would be big enough, was try to isolate all these operations from the main line so that mainline operations would be unimpeded as much as possible. That's why I've created so many of these sidings and spurs, so that switching can be done without using the main line as much as possible. I wasn't able to do it completely, but as much as possible. Anyway, so you have this crossover here, which comes from the east, where a train that serves these two industries can pull off and then can run around itself using the main line if necessary. But what it can also do is completely pull off onto this third track and then use this switch lead to break itself down or to do whatever else is necessary to deliver cars over here to Helena Chemical. And it's got its own spur that wraps around. And then this fourth track here is the spur for Midwest PMS. So between these three tracks and the mainline crossover, or the mainline double-ended siding, get the words right at some point, an operator is able to switch both of these industries without impacting the main line too much. So in closing, even though I had a lot of difficulty designing the layout of this area, eventually I was able to work it out just by placing pieces in locations. Laying track out, getting a visual idea, because I'm a very visual person when I'm trying to figure things out. I need to see things in front of me. And that's why I couldn't completely design this plan on paper before building it. But I also have to give props out to the YouTube community, because part of the reason why I have been documenting this build on YouTube is I wanted feedback from the community, people much more experienced and knowledgeable than I, in many cases, to basically give me some help, and they've done that. And so I encourage anyone who might be struggling with building their own layout, designing it, whatever, to not be afraid to put it out on YouTube. I think the model railroad community is about as nice a community on YouTube, or any social media for that matter, as I've ever seen. And there's way more helpful people out there than there are haters, I guess you could say. So I have to give thanks to the YouTube community who helped me to resolve this final issue with the Holcomb Power Plant spurs, and also the way the helix comes out of, the track comes out of the helix, the main line that is, comes out of the helix between Holly and up here in Garden City. So thank you very much for your assistance. But anyway, that's it for this Garden City Holcomb Power Plant scene. And if anybody has any questions, if I haven't explained something well enough, please feel free to ask in the comments below. Leave any comments, share any opinions. Even though this scene is built, if it gives someone else an idea on their own layout or creates new problems, you know, you might be helping those guys out by leaving an opinion about this scene. So even though my scene is built, if you would have done something differently, please leave that. You know, just because mine's built doesn't mean someone else might not get some help from that. So if anybody has any questions, leave them in the comments below. Hopefully I can provide the answers. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you all for watching, and have a great week.